Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract, in the house. Good pal Todd Cherches. Todd, quick bio, then we're going to get into you, some thoughts on leadership, and clearly a pretty cool book with visual leadership. Todd Cherches is the CEO and co-founder of BigBlueGumball, an innovative New York City-based leadership development and executive coaching firm. He's a member of Marshall Goldsmith's prestigious MG 100 coaches. He's ranked by Thinkers 50, Thinkers 360, and the Powerlist 200 as one of the world's top thinkers and influencers in the field of management and leadership. Todd is a three-time award-winning adjunct professor of leadership at NYU, as well as a lecturer on leadership at Columbia University. And lastly, he's a TEDx speaker and the author of a book we're going to get into today, Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking and Leadership and in Life, something we both hold near and dear to our hearts. Todd, thank you for being here today. Book's fantastic. Why it took me so long to get it, I'm not sure. But ultimately, visual leadership is your flag on the moon that says there's an intersection between kind of visual thinking and leadership. So why don't we start there? I think a doodler, I'm a visual individual. I love going through all the different depictions that you have in various models and thinkings. But let's start there. Like, what is it in your personal experience, your early experiences that you do share in the book as well, that led you to develop a very unique take on leadership, it being sort of a visual acuity?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It kind of evolved over the years. Growing up being a TV addict, I talk about it in my TED Talk and in my book. People would say, Todd, what do you want to be when you grow up? When I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I said, Superman. I'd have my cape on, my bath towel, and flying around the apartment. I said, all right, well, if you can't be Superman, what's your backup plan? I said, all right, then Batman. So those were my only two career paths that I actually envisioned as a kid. But then I realized as a TV addict that I thought working in television in some capacity sounded interesting and exciting. So that's what I was geared towards until I eventually went through a long circuitous path, more like a roller coaster than a path, to eventually become an executive coach and get into management leadership consulting, training, and coaching. And what drove me into it was having some of the worst bosses who've ever set foot on this planet. So I'll stop there for a second. But so my personal mission statement is making the world a better place, one leader at a time. And to me, everyone is a leader in one way or another. So that's kind of like the highlight version.
Oh, excellent. Well, it's a good way to start. We will come back to those bad bosses because I'm intrigued by them and what you've learned. But in the book, you hone in on that power of visual thinking and communication and leadership. And so let's go sort of the next sort of generic question, but how does sort of a visual depictions, visual leading, visual diagramming, how does it enhance a leader's ability ultimately to communicate, to innovate, to lead themselves and others? Tell me a bit about that relationship.
Sure. Visual thinking in a nutshell, which is an idiom almost or a metaphor, is about thinking in pictures. So often in the business world, we're mainly focused on words and numbers, but we don't even we're not aware of how often visual imagery factors and visual language factors in. So visual thinking is about, or visual leadership is about applying visual thinking and visual communication to the practice of management and leadership. So as an example, your book, Work Life Bloom, which I recently finished, which is excellent. There's a lot of synergies between our work, is a great metaphor for gardening and growth and flourishing as a way to tie it to performance and human growth and development, right? So if we are linear, if we are literal, that's one way of thinking. But if we could communicate through metaphor, through storytelling, through humor, which you're great at, through frameworks, your work-life framework is excellent with the six work factors and 6 life factors. So if we could figure out a way we don't want to put people in boxes, but if we could find a way to compartmentalize and create models and frameworks, we can wrap our heads around the messiness and the complexity of work and life and figure out a way to see it more clearly. And then we can see solutions and make decisions that are more effective and more efficient in terms of execution and putting strategies together. So that's basically what the idea is about. So it's about incorporating creativity, and it's about envisioning in your mind's eye a future state that is different from and better than the current reality. And then the next step is, all right, how do I get that idea out of my head and into the heads of others so that they can quote unquote see what I'm saying, right? So if you're a leader, you have a vision of the future, but if you can't get that vision out of your head and into the heads of others, you're not going anywhere, right? You need to engage others and get that common vision and then strategy and execute that and make it happen.
Well, I appreciate the green thumb tip, but this is about you and not me. One of the things you come up with in the book is a really, to me, a very fascinating, I'll call it leadership formula. Having a math pedigree and a math minor, I thought, oh my gosh, this is really good. And I'm very curious to see where it came from. So I'll just explain this for listeners. It's VL equals VT plus VC multiplied by M plus L. And ultimately, it's visual leadership. That's the VL equals parentheses, visual thinking plus visual communication, end parentheses, multiplied by parentheses, management plus leadership, end parentheses. So that's a fascinating formula for a guy like me who's a math guy. But then I think about, well, visually, when I see that as well, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can see the components, right, of thinking, of communication, and it being visual. And then, well, you've got to add management plus leadership. So you're already demarcating management to leadership. That equals visual leadership. So tell me all about that, where it came from and how you landed on it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. It's a formula, it's a framework, it's a way of conceptualizing it. And I'm someone who was an English literature major who was terrible at math. So, but that's a great point that you kind of remind me of, is the fact that we need to communicate in multiple ways and multiple languages to multiple stakeholders, right? A math person will see that and go, wow, this is amazing. Someone else might look at this and think it's the quadratic equation and have no idea. Like in my life, I've never had a situation where like, oh, the quadratic equation would really come in handy right now. Or I still have no idea what sine, cosine, or tangent are, but somehow I passed math. But again, we want to speak the language. So if I'm talking to a finance person or an engineer or a technology person, they speak and think linearly in terms of numbers and formulas and algorithms and things like that. And then there are words people and big ideas people who are lost in that, right? So we need to communicate in the language of our stakeholders. So for example, I teach in the HR Master's program at NYU. One of the exercises I do with my students is we come up with a list of all the HR speak we can come up with, all the jargons and acronyms and everything else. We need an LMS, we need an HRIS, we need like all that terminology. But if you need to get funding for that from your CFO, if you don't even know what CFO stands for, you don't even know who to go to. But the CFO, the CIO, CTO, different people are going to see that need through a different lens. So how do you translate it into the language of money? How do you translate that idea into the language of technology or marketing or whatever? So we talk about, just as speaking English, you need to translate into Chinese or French or Italian or Spanish. You need to translate whatever your jargon or speak is of your function into the language of others. And one way to do that is to use analogies and tell stories that will resonate with the other person, right? So if I'm talking to someone, I'm a big baseball fan, so I use a lot of baseball analogies and, particularly related to the Yankees and the Mets. But if I'm talking to someone from Canada, I might say, hockey will resonate more. Or if I'm talking to someone from Australia, I might say, all right, rugby or soccer/football will resonate. So you always want to think about, all right, what's going to resonate with the person I'm talking to, that they'll be able to understand what I'm saying and see what I'm saying. So again, these are just some of the things that visual leadership gets us to think about.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and for your NYU class on the HR side, I'm surprised it's not a month long. I mean, there's so many terrible cliches and idioms that are idiotic inside of HR. But I digress. You've also come up with, Todd, and you could also speak Cherches. You could use that, by the way. You've come up with sort of 4 components, ways, I guess, to help people see kind of what you're saying as a leader. You've touched on one of them actually by bringing up my book, but let's not go back there. So you've got visual imagery, mental models, metaphors, and the storytelling, visual storytelling, where visual imagery, like doodling, like some of the graphics in the book, videos, emoticons, shapes, right? Such important parts. Mental models, like equations, graphs, tables, right? Diagrams, matrices, those bits. Metaphors, like a garden box, or when you're drawn into like your point, right? Like something that brings someone in, like the metaphor could be the Socceroos in Australia or what have you, if need be, and then the storytelling. So tell me again, I just love those. So maybe break those down a bit more for us, and why they're so important for leaders, which is ultimately what you're getting at, to use in the narrative of leading.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I break it down to those four categories, but they're not mutually exclusive. They overlap. And when used in combination, even more effective. So for example, category one, using visual imagery. That is our Zoom backdrops. That is our PowerPoint slides. That is using anything that we could see with the eye, visual imagery. And it's not just two-dimensional, it could be three-dimensional. So for example, one of my clients, my coaching clients, we were meeting, and I said he was avoiding the big topic. And I said, you are avoiding the elephant in the room.
Nice.
So we need to address that. Or I'll ask a question to remind someone to be more curious. Like Curious George on my desk. If someone is being inflexible, I may say that we need to be more Gumby-like, or we need to bend over backwards to serve our
Look
client.
at you go.
Or if a client is being really outdated, like talking like, oh, back in IBM in 1985, it's like, no one cares about that. You are being a dinosaur. So I'll just hold up my Tyrannosaurus Rex. So again, I could do this all day long, but the idea being, when you use humor, when you use props, when you use imagery, it resonates and it sticks. And I talk about in my TED Talk, in my book, three things: attention, comprehension, and retention. When you use visual image and visual language, attention, it gets people to focus, right? Because they're looking, because it's unusual and unexpected. Ooh, what's he going to do next? What toy or whatever is he going to pull out, or what's the next slide going to be? So that's attention. Comprehension is understanding. When you use a model, a framework, a story, it helps people to understand. And retention, people remember it because it stands out from the crowd. Like Seth Godin always talks about, be remarkable, right? This purple cow metaphor, I always remember. You're driving down the road, you see a bunch of cows, you may say, oh, there's a bunch of cows. You see a purple cow, you're going to stop and say, wow, that's a purple cow, right? So what's the purple cow for you? What's going to make people stop in their tracks and notice and remember? That's a big part of when you use visual imagery and visual language. That's category one. So I'll stop there for a second. So what are your thoughts as you think about how you use imagery and how other people do it more effectively?
I couldn't agree more, Todd. I mean, when you're thinking about leaders and whether it's analogies, metaphors, models, visual, and even visual storytelling, you're basically connecting dots, right? You're trying to help the learner, the team member, the client, whoever it is, right? You're trying to say, look, here's where we're trying to get to. To help you get there, let me paint a picture, so to say. Let me tell a story. Let me just help you unsee the bumps that are in the way of you getting from point A to point B. And that's what I really love about both you, the book, and the kind of the frameworks you've got in here. You're saying, I can help you understand in layman's terms, so to say, but through a way in which that'll help you understand in a graphical, comedic, metaphorical, relatable. I think that's the key word way, and that's kind of where I wanted to get to, is that your frameworks in your book and the kind of the concept is actually a relatability mission. You're trying to say, hey, leader, if you want to relate better to your team member and whoever the client may be, use these tactics, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was doing a workshop on, we didn't talk about drawing yet. I wrote an article for Inc. magazine called, Can You Draw What Your Company Does? If you had to get up on a whiteboard or flip chart and without words, sketch out what your company does and how you're different from and better than the competition, what would you draw? Would you draw a mind map, a storyboard, a process diagram? Would you use a metaphor? I tell a whole story in that Inc. article about how a company used metaphors to kind of figure out who they were in terms of their identity. So I was doing a visual thinking workshop that incorporated drawing for a group of 20 CEOs, and they had to do exactly what I described. And these two guys were sitting together, and one guy said after the exercise, he said, I've known this guy for 15 years, and until he sketched out his supply chain and basically indicated where his problems were, I never really understood his business, but now I can see how I could help him, because I knew in general what he did, but I didn't have a mental picture. And now I do. In fact, I was just doing a similar webinar a couple of weeks ago for a hospital. And I talked about how when my wife and I brought my mother-in-law to the oncologist, because she was going through bladder cancer treatment, the doctor was explaining her situation, and we had no idea we didn't know a urethra from a ureter, right? We had no idea
Right.
what he was talking about. And I said, can you draw it out for us? My mother-in-law is 90. My wife and I are not doctors. He sketched it out. in 60 seconds, we knew exactly what the issue was, where the problem was, where they had to do the radiation, if they were going to have to do surgery. But we had a mental picture of the situation. So it's just like we talked about with HR jargon. Every business has its jargon, especially the medical profession, right? So a doctor talking to patients needs to be able to translate through story, analogy, metaphor, and imagery what they're talking about. So it's just, that was a real life example that happened not that long ago.
Wow. Well, thanks for being so vulnerable and sharing that. It certainly will resonate with many in walking into those doctors' offices and a whole bunch of
Yeah, just say to your doctor, can you paint, like you said, can you paint me a picture? Doctors have a model. Yeah, I had a problem with my ear. The doctor pulled out his ear model and showed me, it's not your eardrum, it's the eustachian tube. It's just like whatever it was. But then I got it because I saw the model. It's like, that's what we need to do. And so often what's challenging is so many of us deal in things that are intangible or abstract. And that's when the challenge comes in. How do I make the invisible visible? And if you could do that, you could really hit your target.
Well, then you're Superman. Speaking of which, you did allude to earlier and have gone on record in various other outlets that you are, quote, on record as having the Guinness Book of World Records of the most number of worst bosses to work for. So I wanted to tackle that just for a second, but also, I guess, perhaps compliment perhaps your answer. And that is, Todd, were they visual leaders? And was it like, if they weren't, is that where you started to think, look, they're not connecting with me. They're not relatable with me. Just help me by unpacking that a bit.
Yeah, not only were they not visual leaders, they were not leaders at all. They were bureaucratic managers and tyrants and psychopaths, many of them. I worked in the TV industry in Hollywood for a number of years. I'm from New York, and no one could tell from my accent and how fast I talk. I try to pause and I try to slow down, but when I get excited, I have so much to say. But I moved out to LA after a year of working in advertising in New York, and I got a series of jobs in Hollywood, and it was amazing. It was my dream. But unfortunately, my dreams became a nightmare due to so many of these really bad bosses, really incompetent, insecure. So one of the stories I tell in my book, in my chapter, I forget what chapter number, my love letter to horrible bosses. I was sitting at my desk one day and my boss's door flew open and I felt something whip by my head and my boss threw a box of pens at my head because they were not the ones she wanted. So instead of, I tell that story to my students and I say, if you had to give your assistant some feedback that they may not have ordered the right pens, can you think of any other way of delivering that feedback? It's like, other than throwing it at their head. It's like, no, I can't really think of anything. It's like, if you want them to learn their lesson, that's the only way. So, but that was just like a normal Tuesday, right? That wasn't even like a special occasion. But yeah, leaders who are not empathetic, who are not caring, who are not compassionate and are tyrannical, quote, bosses. Hopefully, if you're lucky, you haven't had too many of them. Unfortunately, I had many, mainly because I worked in Hollywood for so many years. And that's a challenge that we face is so much bad management and poor leadership. And that's why I'm dedicated. I figure if I could get my students to become better leaders at that stage in their career, that will hopefully cascade throughout their lives and cascade down to the people that they manage and they lead in their lives. So that's what I try to do through my executive coaching work and through my teaching.
Well, I should say that particular former boss of yours, I think you've proven that the pen is mightier than the sword in this case, Todd, for sure. You have another concept and a diagram in the book, and it's the power dial, where you basically describe that power emanates from three sources. There's personal power, relational power, and positional power. I really liked that. I mean, there's a lot to like in the book and your thinking and your writing, but can you help me understand a bit what these mean for people and listeners and their importance ultimately?
Yeah, so often power has a negative connotation, but if you think about it as influence, the ability to get things done through and with other people, so often we think of power as your title or your position or your role, right? But if you also think about the fact that you have power and influence through your personal power, what you know, who you are, your communication skills, your influencing skills, and those types of things, your social skills, and then your relational power, your ability to collaborate with other people, to form coalitions, to get things done as a team through team working. So power is not just about saying, I told you so, right? From a management leadership perspective, it's about gaining buy-in. It's about influencing, getting people on board. So when you break it down to those different categories, it helps us to realize that we have more power than we think we have. And one of the metaphors I use that I love is if you picture a light, an outlet on the wall, right? There's only potential power there until you plug something in, and then you could light up the world, right? So within you is that potential power that you may not be plugging into to generate the light or the energy or whatever that you have within you. So that's the idea behind the power dial, to shift the focus from authoritarianism to influence, and with a more altruistic motivation to it, and say, how can I get things done through what I know, where I sit, and who I know and who knows me, and then combined, you have more power and influence to get stuff done.
Yeah, I felt that, you're right. There's such a almost negative connotation to the word power. And when you think about it altruistically and also as an opportunity for potential, but in a good way, relational, positional, personal, etc., I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a really good reframing that you did. And obviously accompanying by a diagram, which helped me visually. But related to power, sometimes you have to give power away. And what I'm getting at is I want to read a passage from the book, Todd, because it kind of relates, but let me get your thoughts. So you write, while it is admirable to keep on keeping on, there is no shame in moving on if what you're doing just isn't working for you anymore. If you're disengaged, if you're unhappy, if you're frustrated, if you've given it your all and see little or no possibility of sunnier skies, then perhaps the best choice might just be to make a change. And that's personal power. That's you saying, look, I have this opportunity to say whether I've failed, but I've learned, I've got to stop, but it's not quitting. It's just taking a pause. Tell me a bit about that concept where the relationship of quitting or pausing or making a change is so almost frowned upon, yet it's actually a superpower.
Yeah, that's really when you think about quitting, it again has such a negative connotation. But if you reframe or rephrase quitting as stopping, why wouldn't you stop something that was not non-productive or hurtful or not beneficial? And what triggered that chapter was one of my NYU students came to me and she said, I started reading a book and I hated it. It was boring. It didn't resonate with me. But I feel I have my father sitting on my shoulder saying, don't be a quitter. So he was like, if you even read one page of the book, you have to finish the book. If you watch 2 minutes of a movie, you need to finish the movie. So it was so ingrained in her to never quit on anything. And that triggered this chapter, and I gave her the permission to stop. It's like, you have sunk costs. Like if you're in a movie and you hate it, walk out. Like life's too short. I think that's something that comes with maturity, and you realize how fast life goes, that when you spend time that's not productive, or I post a blog post every October saying, make next month a November. Dedicate the month of November to saying no to the things that are not working for you as you wrap up the year and head into the new year. So I think that's the idea that we're talking about here. Give yourself permission to quit, to stop. There's a great quote in Marshall Goldsmith's, our mentor, Marshall Goldsmith's What Got You Here Won't Get You There, where he quotes Peter Drucker in saying, we teach leaders what to do, but we don't spend enough time teaching leaders what to stop doing. Right. So one of the models I use here's my traffic lights. It's stop chapter in my book. Stop, start, and continue. Right. Yellow light, what's working that we want to continue. Red light, what should we stop doing? And green light, what should we start doing instead? Right. So if you just have that visual, that's traffic light, image in your head, it will remind us to say, you know what, this isn't working. I need to stop right here, revisit, reflect, and maybe change course or go down a whole other path.
Well, that's why I was kind of bringing up and tying the two together. There's such power, personal power, relational, positional power, when you as a leader can say no to just stop doing the nuttiness, the adding on more and more and more, and saying yes to everything without saying no to something. There's such a power to that. That's why I wanted to kind of connect the dots. So it sounds like you're in pretty good agreement. I don't have to force you to say yes.
No. That's saying no to something gives you permission to say yes to something else, right? Yeah. So you're not just saying no and leaving a void. You're creating a space, right? And it doesn't. You have to. Well, I keep this here, my magic wand. It doesn't happen magically, right? You can't just wave your magic wand and make something go away. You have to make a constant, conscious decision. And one of the things I always talk about is not making a decision is a decision you've made, right? So you may procrastinate, but if you do, the window of opportunity may close or may be harder to undo or go back the longer it goes on. So the best thing you could do is just hit the pause button, which is one of the other metaphors in my book, one of the chapters on remote control your life. Imagine you have a TV remote in your hand. When do you need to fast forward? When do you want to rewind? Sometimes you need to hit the pause button just to slow things down, catch a breath, take a chance to reflect. So these are all different ways to, when you think visually in these ways, it's just a tool and a way to frame or reframe something that will help you to make these decisions and help you to take actions that you might not otherwise have taken.
Well, and that thinking, not thinking, or making a decision, not making a decision is very Kierkegaard / Kant-esque. Well done, sir. Okay, I'm going to end with 4 rapid fire questions, but they're yours, Todd. So in the back of the book, you've got what you call sort of 10 tough questions. I want to ask you 4 of them and play back for you. And then we'll find out where we can learn more about the great Todd Cherches. Okay, question number 1, actually number 1 of your tough 10. How do you personally define leadership, Todd?
There's so many different definitions, but to me, leadership is about influence. So it doesn't matter your role, your title, your position. Can you get buy-in? Can you make something happen? And influence is not just about persuasion or convincing. It's about having an impact. I always talk about I, impact and influence. So if there's a void there, you raise your hand. If leadership is needed, step up and don't wait to be anointed a leader. Just start leading. When I say to my students, how do you become a leader? They think, well, you have to sit and wait until someone like taps you on the shoulder and that's not it at all. Just start leading, right? Look for opportunities to step up to leadership. So that to me is what leadership is about. It's about taking action and being proactive rather than reactive in terms of having a positive influence and having a vision of what's possible and then taking steps towards making that vision a reality.
Love that I piece, Todd. That's a good bonus for everyone. Question 2, but 3 from your tough questions. Who have been, or maybe 1 or 2 for you, some of the influential people in your life, the kind of private figures where you've learned something valuable about leadership?
So often we look to leadership, but the Abe Lincolns of the world or George Washington, but we all have leaders in our life, good and bad. And my parents come first. But the one who really sticks out is my high school English teacher, Mr. Patterson, because I was the quintessential 3 B's guy, back of the room, behind the scenes bookworm. I never spoke in class. I was a complete nerd with the acne and the thick glasses and the braces. But Mr. Patterson, who taught English literature, just introduced me to the world of poetry and Shakespeare. And he recognized in me my potential as a writer, as a thinker. So he's the one person who just kind of plucked me out of obscurity within my class of 30 students and said, hey, you're really good at this. And that just made me think, hey, I am a good writer. I am a good reader. And my reading and my writing skills is what has propelled my career. It was much later that I developed my public speaking skills, but just realizing that I had something to say and other people wanted to hear it. So he was the one who triggered that in me.
Lovely, and reminds me of my own Mr. Massotti in Hamilton, Ontario, near Toronto. Question 3, about 4 from the end of your book. What have been some of the defining leadership moments in your life, Todd?
Unfortunately, most of them were very negative, as in terms of the bad bosses. But I had a few good bosses along the way too. And one of them, Joe Armentano, who I started out my speaking career at Dale Carnegie Training. It was after 9/11, and I was not working. I was not doing a lot. New York was in a very depressed state, and I said I need something just to boost my confidence and get out of the house. And I decided to sign up for a Dale Carnegie course. And I had never spoke publicly before. I had no confidence. My people skills. I'm an extreme introvert. And I took that course. And again, just as Mr. Patterson did with my writing skills, Joe Armentano became my mentor with my public speaking skills. He's like, you're really good at this. And he's the one who got me into the program to become a trainer and a coach. And that launched my coaching and leadership development career. So he's the one that comes to mind there.
I love it. Okay, last one, and apt, I suppose, as we end this session with you and I on the show. What are some of the key leadership lessons you want to pass along to others, Todd, other than writing an entire book? Just maybe a couple of key ones there. Yeah.
A couple of things. take time for reflection. So often we're like racing from one thing to the other, but again, hit that pause button. I recommend to my coaching clients and to my students to keep a journal, write down thoughts, aspirations, visions of the future. And this is one of my other obsessions. I started keeping a journal my first day of college back in September of 1980, and I haven't missed a day since. And I'm up to year 40, whatever this is, 44. In my journals. So when I was writing my book, I was able to go back and say, what was the name of that boss? Or what was that incident that happened? So it's a little obsessive, but again, journaling, reflecting, taking time to think about, one of the things I always say is that leadership lessons are hiding in plain sight all around us if we only stop to notice. And that's part of the visual thinking, is to be aware of the things that are around us and take notice and learn from them. So that's what I would say.
I love it. Okay, well, Todd Cherches, the book is Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life. Where can everyone find out more about you and the book, Todd?
Sure. The word visual, I'll just hold it up for a second. Just for the spelling, it's Visual Leadership with one L, shared capital L. Anywhere books are sold, Amazon or anywhere else. For more on, if you want to see my TED Talk, it's right on my website, toddcherches.com. And connect with me on LinkedIn. Just I saw you on Dan's show. Love to connect, and that way we can continue the conversation about. And visual thinking is not just for people who, even if you have ICD, which is I can't draw syndrome, don't think, oh, I'm not visual or I can't draw. This isn't for me. We are wired visually. That's just the way our brains work. But if we could be more aware of it and then more intentional, then we could be better visual thinkers, communicators, and visual leaders.
That's so lovely. And I'm also super happy that ICD doesn't stand for I Can't Dan. So that's a bonus for me as well. Todd Cherches, thank you so much. Just a delight. Great to chat deeply about the book and you, but it's also really good to have you in the nest of friends that as we're trying to make a difference in this world. So thank you for that as well, Todd.
Thank you, Dan.
All right, everyone, another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan, and today Todd Cherches. Again, the book Visual Leadership, Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life with the great Todd Cherches. See you next time, everyone.